Kevin Schindler. Kevin Schindler is the historian at Lowell Observatory, where he has worked for 28 years and is an active member of the Flagstaff history and science communities. He has written 7 books, including Historic Tales of Flagstaff, written with Mike Kitt. In May 2023, he served as Grand Canyon's astronomer in residence. Fun fact, Kevin has both a fossil crab and asteroid named after him. I hope everyone has had an opportunity also with the beautiful clear skies we've had to look up in the evening. It's spectacular. So without any further ado, Kevin Schindler.
So I hope everybody's having a good time and as good a time as I am here at the conference. To me, this is a real special opportunity to come back to one of the most beautiful places in the world and remind myself of why I love it so much. I only live an hour and a half away, so I feel real blessed to be that close. But there's nothing like being here and revisiting old friends, making new friends. Yesterday, I was outside and bumped into Steve and Susie Verkamp, who I've known for years. Back in 2008, when they pulled out of their store, and they had this big rock, this 535-pound meteorite that many of you remember seeing through the years, and they were going to donate it to Lowell Observatory. And so I came up here with our grounds guy then and technical guy, and we removed the meteorite, first with a lift, lifting it up, and then the stand went through the floor into the basement, into the bedrock. And so Steve and Ralph and I had a hacksaw, and we're cutting this thing off, and then lifted it through the floor. And so that meteorite is now on display at Lowell Observatory. So it was neat to see Steve and Susie yesterday, and we walked over to the cemetery and looked at their family plot. And it was kind of fun because they were planning out where they were going to be one day there. And so I just love this conference because you can see it make all these connections and see the people that make it so special. And I think it really came to a head last night when I was talking about Buckey O'Neill, one of my favorite characters in the history of Arizona. After dark, I went outside to look at the skies. As Tom said, the skies here are incredibly beautiful. And so I walked to the rim, and I was looking up, and there's Jupiter off to the east coming up in the sky. And then the Milky Way, just really brilliant in the sky, going through the Big W, Cassiopeia, and then passing not quite overhead behind me, and as if it was the end of the rainbow, is right over Buckey O'Neill's cabin. And it was just, it gives me goosebumps thinking about it right now. And that's what the Grand Canyon is to me, all these really neat experiences. My experience with Buckey O'Neill goes back years just because I was always fascinated by this guy who the historian William McLeod Ring called the most many-sided man Arizona has produced. Buckey O'Neill moved here to Arizona when he was 19 years old. And over the next 20 years, I don't think it's a question of what he did, it's a question of what didn't he do. He was involved in so many things. He was such a go-getter. He worked a lot in newspapers as a typesetter. He created his own newspaper, the Hoof and Horn, and he also wrote, not just for the newsletter. He wrote fictional stories that went into newspapers like the San Francisco Chronicle. He wrote pamphlets that I'll talk about a little bit later. So journalism and writing was a big part of what he did. He was involved in courts. He was a court reporter and had really amazing stories of experiences of, like, for instance, during one case that was being tried, it was a water rights issue, and a fight broke out, and he ended up getting stabbed right between the webbing of his fingers. He was just a guy that was always there in the middle of stuff. Like a lot of people then, he volunteered for the local militia, firefighter. He was the county school superintendent, and one of the things he pushed through was compulsory attendance for school, because before that time, it wasn't required for kids to go to school. The county, or the tax assessor, and this is an interesting one because one of the things as tax assessor that that made a lot of enemies for him was he thought the railroads should be paying taxes. They got a lot of breaks for building railroads and not having to pay taxes on the land, and he thought they should. And that made a lot of enemies for him. And when he ran for congressional office, that came back to bite him a little bit. But ironically, one of his connections to the Grand Canyon, he kind of went on the other side of that a little bit to encourage the railroads to come to the area. He was sheriff of Yavapai County, which was like the size of New York State at the time. This is just one of the things he did. He ran for Congress a couple times, mayor of Flagstaff, and of course, famously, the last big thing he did was as a Rough Rider. So he did all these different things, and if you go around Arizona, you certainly recognize his presence. Prescott, of course, is where he lived, and if you go there, you can't help but feel the presence of Buckey O'Neill. The local college, their nickname is the Rough Riders, because of the connection with him and the other Rough Riders. At the courthouse, there's of course the statue. If you're not from the area, you see that it's called the Rough Rider statue, but I think most locals call it the Buckey O'Neill statue because he's our guy. He's the one that made all this happen. Also in town, there's a plaque at the site where his house used to be. So there's a lot of presence of him. Of course, here at the Grand Canyon, you don't have to go very far. This is where I was standing last night when I was looking at the Milky Way coming right over the left side here. It was just stunning. If you're staying in town tonight, go to the rim after dark. It's just stunning how bright the stars are in the Milky Way. And by the way, just because I do work in an observatory, I'll point out that I took this picture earlier this year with the moon rising right here. So that's just a little astronomy cameo for the program. Another place that is obvious is O'Neill Butte. If you've done any hiking, or if you're looking from the rim, looking down, you can see O'Neill Butte at certain spots. So there's a big presence of him, of course, in Arizona, but here at the Grand Canyon is very obvious, especially from the South Rim. So to talk about his connection here at the South Rim, something that was kind of gurgling around in my brain was, okay, we know what he did here. He developed mines, and he pushed to have the railroad built. But let's go back a little bit. What really drove him? What inspired him to do all these things? To be this many-sided person, to be a politician, to be a sheriff, to be a school superintendent, and there are a lot of things that drove him. I think. I think first of all, when we look at that, we look at his name itself. His name was William Owen O'Neill, but his nickname is Buckey. And he got that nickname because soon after he got to the territory, he loved playing cards. He was an inveterate card player, and he especially liked playing faro. And he became known for this guy who would put everything on the table. He would buck the odds. That's how he got his name, Buckey O'Neill. He's bucking the odds. And so that says something about his character. I think when he believed in something, he went full force into it. One of these things he believed in was making money. I wouldn't say he was a complete mercenary about this, but he had a lot of schemes that he tried to make money at. And that wasn't the only thing that drove him, but it was certainly one thing. I think one of the great examples of his money-making efforts was when he was in the territory. He got to know the territory very well. And there's a place, Mayor Station, kind of in the Prescott-ish area of Arizona. And he was riding through there and saw that there were some mines there, mines that had been developed for years for silver and gold. And he was there apparently talking to somebody who was looking at the mines, and he said, "What about these rocks over here? They're really multicolored, they're beautiful. What's the deal with these?" And they said, "Oh, that's something called, they know as Mexican onyx. It has no value. There's no silver or gold over there." And Buckey, this is his mindset. He said, "Wait a minute, maybe there is value there." So he got two partners, and they each put in $150 to buy the property and the land. And then Buckey made contacts with people over back east in New York and Chicago, and sent samples to them, these mineral samples of this really pure Mexican onyx. And it wasn't only pure, but it was also extended a long ways. And he created, with his will, he created this market for Mexican onyx. And soon that mine, he didn't work the mine, he was just kind of prospecting it. But they started developing it, and after a couple of years, he and his partners sold it. They had each put in $150, and they sold it for a total of $200,000. So they each made a $150 investment. They each made $66,000. That's not a bad return. If you go there today, in fact, you can still go there, and they still mine this. This Mexican onyx is used like in countertops and things like that. But it's just beautiful rock. But he saw something where nobody else at the time did see it. And I suspect there were a lot of people that were kicking themselves because it seemed so obvious after the fact. So I think, money is one thing that certainly drove him. And as some historians have said, he always had a scheme going to try to make some money. I think something else that was really part of his identity that drove him was he was such a promoter. He promoted everything. He wasn't the guy doing the mining, but he was the guy that was sending samples off to the East Coast and telling them what a great deposit this was. He was also somebody, pretty much anything he did, he promoted. But I think one important thing he did was promoting statehood, growth of the territory and statehood. Like so many community leaders of the time in Prescott and Flagstaff and Phoenix, there was this question of statehood. Some people wanted it, some people didn't want it. Buckey was one who thought statehood was critical, and statehood meant having an economy. It meant bringing people here. He wrote a pamphlet called Central Arizona for Homes, for Health, for Wealth. And I don't know, this is like classic Chamber of Commerce type of stuff. In one place he wrote, "If pure air there be, it is here. The step grows elastic, and one feels as though he had drunk of the fabulous fountain of eternal youth. And so it is throughout the years. The feeling of listless lassitude, which elsewhere makes life a burden, is never felt here." So does anybody feel listless lassitude this morning? See, he was right about that. So this is one of his efforts to really promote Arizona with the idea of statehood. He also was part of this promotion was understanding that there need to be an economy here. There need to be a reason for people to live here. And so when scientific expeditions came through, for instance, the archaeologist Fuchs, he took them to Montezuma Castle in Camp Verde. In this case, in 1894, there was an Easterner named Percival Lowell who sent an assistant out here named Andrew Douglas to find a good place for an astronomical observatory. And Douglas went from Tombstone, Tucson, Tempe, and then went to Prescott. And at Prescott, everybody, all the locals said, "You got to talk to Buckey O'Neill. He knows the territory better than anybody else." And he recommended some places to do that testing. So with this mindset he had of promotion and statehood, another example was, I think that kind of combines his drive for income as well as promotion, is the development of the Buckeye Irrigation Canal. That's not named after him. Buckeye, as in the Buckeye State, it was named after a contingent of Ohioans who had started this thing. So that's why it's called Buckeye. But he bought into this because he saw it as an investment, but also if Arizona is become a state one day, you've got to have water resources. There's got to be a way to bring water to plant and so on. And so we invested in this. And then finally, I think it's nice to point out when the war started, the Spanish-American War, and he volunteered, he insisted that he'd be the first official volunteer of what became nicknamed as the Rough Riders. And he famously said, "Who would not gamble for a new star?" This has been interpreted in different ways. One is that he's saying, we'll put our life on the line if it means we'll get a promotion and become like a brigadier general. But another way of interpreting it, which it seems like he thought, was we're willing as Arizona's to go down and fight in the Spanish-American War to prove that Arizona belongs in the Union as a state. So we're willing to put our life on the line to add a star to the flag of the United States. So those are two things that I think are important when we think about his time here at the Grand Canyon and why he came here. So his mining interest, and I apologize for the lousy picture, but it gets the idea across. He had these interests in money and in developing the area, and he had a lot of interest in different areas around Arizona. He came up to the Grand Canyon, like so many others at the time, not only fell in love with the grandeur of it, but also he thought he could make some money in mining. And so he, about 20 miles south of here, there was a site that had copper called the Anita mine, and he saw that as a great resource. And then O'Neill Butte, the reason it's named after him is because he developed some claims in this general area. And so, boy, he thought, what a great opportunity, another place to make money by developing mines. And there's copper, there's asbestos, there's some silver, there's a lot of different minerals here. So he set up, he built a cabin, he built an office here, and this is, again, where I was standing last night. And again, I encourage everybody to walk over there if you're here tonight, to just stand there and enjoy the grandeur of the place. If you want to stay in this cabin, by the way, I went over to Bright Angel yesterday, and they said the going rate now is $750 a night. And so maybe during the next symposium, we'll have that as an auction item that you can go on. So he had this idea of getting the ore out, but there's a major problem with this. The nearest railroad is 60 or 70 miles away, and the nearest smelter is even further away. So first, if you're going to get these minerals out of, whether it's Anita, which isn't inside the canyon, or from rocks within the canyon, how are you going to get it out? You have to first get it up to the rim, and then you have to ship it. You can do it by wagon, but that's not very practical. How are you going to do it? And so he had the idea of developing a train, either a spur, either from Flagstaff or Williams, that comes up to Grand Canyon. And so he went back east. He made some trips. He brought some of these samples of ore with him, and he looked for investors back east. He went to Chicago, he went to New York, and finally he found a group called the Lombard Good and Company, investment firm, and they agreed that they would put some money forward to it, but he had to get more money, and he had to get support from the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad, because there is the main line that runs through. This would just be a spur. So he works on this over the course of a few years, trying to generate money, and he gets some, goes to the Santa Fe, Topeka, and what's up there? The ATSFR. And he went to talk to them, and initially they didn't like the idea because they saw that investment firm as a fly-by-night place, even though they had offices around the country and in Europe, but they didn't like the idea of it. So Buckey kept at it. As we heard earlier, he's a promoter, he pushes stuff. And so finally, the company had a change of heart, and that was because of a letter that Buckey wrote. First, in that letter, he sent a sample of different minerals that were available, and they were pretty good samples. But he also included a map. And in this map, he said this map shows the individuality and attractiveness that it does not now possess for the ordinary traveler. This is when he started really pushing the idea of tourism. Like so many of the other early settlers here, or early Euro settlers, John Hance and others, they came here to develop mines, but they saw the value of tourism. And Buckey O'Neill saw this, and so the railroad finally, he was able to convince them when he showed them that a railroad would be valuable not only for getting the minerals out of here, but also for bringing tourists here. And this was critical to the development of the tourism industry here at the canyon. So because of this, the Santa Fe and Grand Canyon Railroad was officially incorporated on January 1st, 1897. I'm just going to go through a couple things here. A right-of-way was approved from Williams to a place called Lombard. Lombard was the head of the investment firm, so they were going to name the community after Lombard. And so that right-of-way was from Williams to what we know to where the terminal of the station is today. If they had originally built the tracks all the way to the station, it probably wouldn't be Grand Canyon Village. We would be in Lombard. That would have been the official name of it. But initially, the initial construction just went to Anita. That's as far as it went. It didn't get all the way to the Grand Canyon yet. And so they built it, got it to Anita, and it first ran March 15th, 1900. And within less than a year, it was out of business. And it was sold to the Topeka Santa Fe because there just wasn't enough business. It's hard to say all the reasons why. One is that the minerals, the deposits weren't as extensive as they hoped. But also Buckey O'Neill wasn't around anymore. So you wonder if that had something to do with it. Because I should point out that the Grand Canyon Railway as we know it opened in 1901. But Buckey wasn't here to see it finished. I've always wondered if he hadn't had an early demise, would he have found a way to make that railroad successful? It's hard to say. But he didn't make it because he famously went down to Cuba and supposedly said, the Spanish bullet is not molded that will kill me. And as some legend goes, right after he said that, he took a bullet in the mouth and died on the spot. And that was the end of him, 38 years old. And he's buried at Arlington Cemetery. Whether that's the case or not, who knows? But it does again make me wonder, as you're standing at the Buckey O'Neill cabin, you can see this plaque inside. He made such a difference here. He made such an impact on, today as we look back, the tourism we have today and the train travel here. He had such an impact on the Grand Canyon. What would it have been if he hadn't died and if he had come back and pushed that railroad through initially? And then what else would he have done to the Grand Canyon? Because it seems like as his life went on, he spent more and more of his time focused on the canyon. So who knows what would have happened, but we do know that he had a great impact on the development of Grand Canyon as a national park and as a destination for tourists. So with that, thank you for listening to me, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the show.